Lovely to see everyone again, as always. Continuing in this series on free will, just a PSA, we might end a little bit early tonight. I'm expected to pick somebody up from the airport, and if their flight gets in a little early, then no. He's coming in tomorrow, God willing. So we're continuing in this series related to free will, and last class was a lot of fun. Was a very profound topic related to whether or not we have free will and a challenge to free will based off of divine foreknowledge. Tonight, what I want to look into is a more specific question. It's not as broad of a question, but we're going to see that it is a question that really gets to the point of where our freedom lies and just how we are supposed to be using our free will. And the question I want to deal with tonight for Life Speakers Questions is, are all of our decisions really free? Are all of our decisions really free? And we started to touch on that last time, Jack. There's a packet over there on the big table. We began to touch on this topic last time, but I want to tonight investigate a little bit more into whether or not our decisions, or rather, are all of our decisions truly free? And I want to first take a step back. I want to take a step back and acknowledge the role that nature and nurture play into our decision-making process. That in Judaism, we acknowledge the fact that, of course, we have natural inclinations and we have been nurtured in certain environments and certain upbringings that, of course, influence what we do. Now, we did already learn the Rambam that we're going to review tonight that tells us that there is this radical theory to freedom, that we have, radical freedom, that we can do whatever we want. And there's nothing that forces us to do something. Ultimately, the decisions are ours. But with that said, of course, there is nature and nurture that pushes us in a certain direction. But the Rambam does write that Al Yavor b'machshavoscha, that he writes this in the 5th chapter of the Laws of Teshuvah, that don't think that davar zeh she'omrim Tipshi Umos Ha'olam V'rov Gomle B'nei Yisrael, that don't think that this ridiculous idea that people say that Sha'akadosh Baruch Hu gozer ala Adam mitchilas briyaso lios tzadik or Russia, that it is destined to a person whether or not they're going to be righteous or they're going to be wicked. We don't believe in this determinism. We don't believe in fatalism. We believe that we have agency and ownership over our actions. Ein hadavar kain, says Rambam. That is, it's not the case. Ela kol adam roi lo liyos tzaddik. Every single person has the ability to become righteous, to become a tzaddik, ke Moshe Rabbeinu, like Moshe. Now, not a prophet like Moshe. In terms of prophecy, that's something that's God-given, and we know that Moshe was endowed with the most amount of prophecy that a human can achieve. But what we're talking about is righteousness. Righteousness, you become as righteous as Moshe Rabbeinu. Anybody can become as righteous as Moshe Rabbeinu, fulfilling their potential. And Rasha ki Yeravam, or you could become a Rasha like Yeravam. Yeravam was during the days of Shlomo HaMelech. He was the first of the kings of Israel. Shlomo was the king of Ari Yehuda before the kingdom split, and then Yeravam became the king of Israel. And as a power move, he set up houses of idol worship. I mean, Mamish, he was one of the reasons for the beginning of the end of the destruction of the temple. He was the one that re-revolutionized idol worship for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Yeravam was a Merusha, was like as wicked as you can get. You could make a decision. You're either going to be as righteous as Moshe Rabbeinu or as wicked as Yeravam, or Chacham or Sachal. You can be wise. You could be stupid. It's up to you. whatever you want, that is in your hands. The sense of this theory of radical freedom that the Rambam poses. But at the same time, the Rambam does say that while that's true, that doesn't mean that we are not influenced on some level by our nature and nurture. He writes the following. He says, Yesh bein chol dea v'dea, that between every single character traits, harachoka mimenu bekatzeh ha'acher deos beinenos zu rechoka mizu, that every single characteristic, every single character trait, there are extremes in every character trait. That a person, kindness, we know is a good thing, but a person is overly kind, so they become, instead of a welcome banner, they become a welcome mat. That if a person is, and the other extreme, if a person is overly, he's a miser and he doesn't give any tzedakah, so we know that's a terrible thing, right? So you have to find a balance between the two, where you are giving, but at the same time, you're also taking care of yourself and your family. That a person is honest, but you can't also be so honest that you become like Amelia Bedelia, or you become, right? You have to make sure that that you are smart about the information that you share, right? So the Rambam says that a person needs to be balanced in this way. And then he writes, V'chol hadeos yesh mehen deos shehein la'adam mitchilas briyaso lefi teva gufo. There are some characteristics that people are just born with, he says. Some things that naturally come easier to some people than others. That's just the way that God has created you. V'yesh mehen deos shetivo shel adam zeh mechuvan v'asid lekabel osam b'meheber yosem mishar deos, and there are some characteristics that for some people are easier to learn than others. That patience, for example, is easier for one person than it is for another person. And you find that just naturally that people are just different. It's not necessarily pinned only on nurture or only on nature, but people have these inbred characteristics. And then he writes, good, we'll leave that Rambam for now. So we find that while the Rambam says that we have this freedom that we could do whatever we want, at the same time, we also have these inbred characteristics. We have struggles related to, for some people, they're just born impatient, and other people are born with more patience. And that is going to influence your decision making on some level regarding just how free you're going to feel. Ultimately, the decision is going to be yours, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be influenced to act one way over another. But the Rambam does say that even though nature and nurture do play a role, you can never blame nature or nurture. You can't blame, the reason why I sin with regard to a certain thing is because it's the community I live in. That the reason why I eat Red Lobster is because every single person on my block goes to Red Lobster on Wednesday nights instead of coming to the rabbi's class. Everybody does it, and therefore, what am I going to do? I'm stuck. Peer pressure, it's too much for me. And that's something that inbred. I've never been easy socially. It's always been difficult for me. Peer pressure is something that I've never had a good handle on. I was born with a lack of self-confidence. My nurture did not contribute to my self-confidence. It's difficult for me to say no. Ram says you can't use it as an excuse. Ultimately, he writes this in Hilchos Deos in the 6th chapter, Derech Briyaso Shel Adam Lios Nimshach B'Deusav Umasav, that the nature of a person is going to be that it pulls him in one direction over another, whether with regard to what he thinks or his conduct. After his friends, based on what they do, he's going to end up doing what his friends do. So then what are you supposed to do about it? Move, says the Rambam. You move. You need to befriend righteous people. You should be live in an area that you can be surrounded with Talmidei Chachamim in order so you learn from their ways. If you know that this is something that's difficult for you, don't say, you know what? I see that this is something so difficult for me. I see that I lack self-confidence. I see that it's difficult for me to turn down the pressure from my friends who are going out to Red Lobster. This is my challenge, and I'm going to step up to the challenge. And I am going to do what I can. I'm giving in every single time, because it's very, very hard, but I'm not going to run away from the challenge. Since the Rambam knows that's idiotic. Run away from the challenge. Don't stick around with those people. You need to acknowledge where the weaknesses are, and you need to combat them. So what we have over here from the Rambam are really three Rambams that when we put them together, we come up with this perspective from the Rambam, where yes, we do have radical freedom. Ultimately, every decision I make is my decision. I have to live with that decision. I bear the responsibility of that decision. That doesn't mean that I'm not influenced by my nature or my by my environment, etc. Of course I am, but then also I need to combat. I need to acknowledge.
God bless, darling. Have a good night.
I need to combat the
Sleep tight, precious.
I need to combat
God bless, baby.
where the problem lies in order so that this is not going to be a challenge moving forward. When I end up getting challenged for them, I'm going to have to come up with another solution. But when I see a solution available, I need to find the solution. So this is number one, the role of nature and nurture in our decision makings. Now I want to get to the question of, are all of our decisions really free? Because based on what the Rambam is saying, that the answer is yes. All of our decisions are free, or maybe influenced in one way or another, but all of our decisions really are our own. But what becomes challenging with regard to this is that while we don't believe, as we mentioned a number of times, in fatalism, determinism, but there are Gemaras that indicate that there is some element in fate in who we are. Now, what do I mean by that? The Gemara says the following. The Gemara says in Masechta Shabbos on Kuf Nun Vav Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, Haiman dibe ma'adim, that one who is born, when they're born, they are under the planet Mars when they're born. So then, Yihi Gever Asid Dama. They're going to be a person who is a shedder of blood. They're going to become a murderer. If that's what you just plain reading the Gemara, it sounds like you're born under Mars, you're destined to be a murderer. Okay, Hitler apparently was born on Mars. Okay, yeah. Yeah, they say Mars. Yeah. Ma'adim, the red planet. Well, you look up at the sky, you see a red planet. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Amar Ravashi says, I umna, I gnava, I tavcha, o I mohala. That Ravashi said that he noticed that he surveyed this, and he came to the conclusion that they will become not necessarily a murderer, but they'll become a surgeon, a bloodletter, a shochet, a mohel, a person who likes to get their hands dirty with blood. Okay, he also says ganva, a thief. You can become a thief. So you have this edgier side to you. You're born under Mars. You have this edgier side to you. And Ravashi noticed that all these people born under Mars, they fell into one of these categories. You became a mohel, you became a shochet, you became a thief, you became one of these more edgier type of people. It sounds like from the Gemara that there is this element of faith, that there's this mazel, what we refer to as mazel, is really the English translation of mazel is fate. So I don't understand. Didn't the Rambam say before that we have this radical freedom that we could do whatever we want? But look at these people, born under Mars, and this is how they ended up. So the Meiri addresses this. The Meiri addresses this, one of the Rishonim on the Gemara and Shabbos, over there, and he writes the following. He says, the Meiri writes that we have freedom, that yes, he agrees with the Rambam. We do have this radical freedom, but that there are some people who the pressure of their nature is very, very strong. It's not going to force them necessarily. Not going to force them, but they have a lot to overcome. A person who is born under Mars, whatever that means, right? And it's obviously not something scientific, it's something a little bit more Kabbalistic, but that person, they either could use this edgier side of them and become a murderer or a thief, or hopefully they channel it appropriately. And what do they become? A shochet or a moel. I actually remember that now it just occurred to me that Rabbi Alan Schwartz, Shlita, so the rabbi of OZ on the Upper West Side. I don't know if you've heard of that shul. It's an old-time shul in Manhattan. What's it stand for again? Ohev Tzedek. The congregation Ohev Tzedek in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Rabbi Alan Schwartz, a major Talmid Chacham, he reviews all of Shas, Bavli, and Yerushalmi every year, and Tanakh twice a year. Goes through all of Tanakh, Bavli, and Yerushalmi every single year. Tanakh twice a year. He's a real. I've had the opportunity to spend some time with him. He's a major Talmid Chacham. So I remember he once told us that he once had a child in their community. The parents were very nervous about because the kid came home with doodles in his notebook from school of a boy killing animals and these really, really graphic, very disturbing images that this child was bringing home with, very aggressive, and they went to go consult Rabbi Schwartz about what do they do about their kid. So Rabbi Schwartz said that, you know what, I'd be happy to study with him if it's okay with you. You bring him for study after school, like a small after school program. I'd be happy to study with him, learn with him, and get to know him a little bit. And Rabbi Schwartz met with the kid, and what they ended up doing was they would spend half of the session learning karate. Rabbi Schwartz happens to be a master in karate. They learned karate together. And then the other half of the class, they'd study Hilchos Shchita. They studied the laws of becoming a shochet. That's what he did with the kid. It makes a lot of sense. It's because now that the kid has this, this edgier side. Maybe he was born under Mars. And let's channel it properly. So actually, I should ask him. I don't know what ended up happening. I know that it ended up working out, but I don't know if he ended up actually becoming a shochet. So the Meiri writes the following. He says it just may be a little bit more difficult to overcome. He says, Shashem nasam biyado bechira lahachriach teva toldasav. God does give us the ability to overcome these things. V'gidrei hadas yeshvu mitzivo lemoshel ba'atzmo levilti lechet achrei akvos toldaso. That God has endowed in every single person the ability to overcome whatever it is, even if it's very difficult to overcome, that nevertheless, God has given you the ability to overcome or rechannel this more aggressive or negative side of that particular individual for something good. And you can apply it to any character trait. A person is really impatient, or just very uneasy, or have a lot of anxiety, or this is mental health. Right? A person is born with certain inbred issues, or whether it be from their nature, their nurture, whatever it might be, but nevertheless, they have these things that influence them to act a certain way. So Baruch Hashem gave us mental health sciences that are supposed to help us combat these things. Like the Rambam said before, similar to the person who lives in a community that is influencing to do the wrong thing. So what do? You spend time with people that will influence you to do the right thing. Mental health counselors were given to us by HaKadosh Baruch Hu for this purpose as well. So this is an example, says the Meiri, of where it just might be a little bit more difficult for him to control himself, but nevertheless, it's in the bounds of our religion. It's within Judaism, that we believe that we do have this radical freedom, like the Rambam suggested. The Sefer Akedas Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak Arma of the 15th century, writes a very similar point in his Sefer on Chumash, the Akedas Yitzchak, in Parshas Chaye Sarah, where he writes that Mazal exists, that fate does exist, but it's not binding. It's not really fate. Mazal. What is Mazal? Fate is not a good translation of Mazal. Mazal is almost fate. It's close to fate, but nevertheless, it's not binding, not 100% binding. Or we'll say like this: it's fate unless you change your fate. Say it like that. I think that's a better way of saying it. It's fate, but you can change your fate. That's what the Akedas Yitzchak writes. That's what he writes. He says, Sichla morim ha'emes biyos el mamshalos. Someone entered the waiting room. He says that Lakoach hamol yad vashem al molet ha'adam beyosel liyoslo netia alachad hamalos. That a person is created with a certain drive to do something. Nevertheless, the man of a person could, the power of an individual could always have the upper hand. The mind of an individual will always have the upper hand over our desires, over our nature, over our quote unquote fate, even to change our fate. That's what the Akedas Yitzchak writes. So based on this, based on what we're presenting, this is basically saying that yes, all of our decisions are free, but there are some things that are just a real challenge in life to be able to overcome. Like Rabbi Shaul Salanter said famously, he said that it's easier to master the entire Shas than it is to change one character trait. By the way, modern psychology, there's studies about the ability to change a character trait is an incredibly difficult feat. It's a real challenge. Rav Moshe Feinstein, in one of his responsa, addresses a question that we have related to our davening, our Shmona Esrei. That in our Shmona Esrei we have the bracha of Hashivenu Avinu L'Sorasecha. We ask God to please put us onto the path of proper teshuvah, or returning to Hashem. So the basic question that everybody asks on that bracha, how can you ask God to influence you to do teshuvah? We've learned that Hakol biyadei Shamayim, chutz mir Shamayim. Everything is in the hands of God. Meaning, the way I am, my desires, my inclinations, my passions, what I look like, what I smell like, all these things are in the hands of God. What is not in the hands of God? My free will, right? Yirat Shamayim, my free will. So teshuvah is free will. So how can we ask God to influence to bring us back, to help us do teshuvah? What does that mean? I thought that's the one thing that's not in the realm of God. That's up to me. So Rav Moshe says that what we're asking God to do is we're davening for him to remove the stumbling blocks, that the things that are in his hands, that are influencing me to act a certain way. I'm asking you, Hashem, please remove them. I don't want to have that nisayim. I don't want to have that challenge. I want to be able to act appropriately and make my decisions a lot easier. Ultimately, the decisions are going to be mine. How I act is ultimately going to be my decision. Whether or not I do teshuvah is going to be up to me. But that doesn't mean that, Hashem, you can't make it a little easier by not putting these stumbling blocks in my way. You know that it's very difficult for I have a hard time with my patience. So Hashem, that's something that's up to you. That's something that's in my physiology. That it's part of my nature, or my nurture, my environment has contributed to my lack of patience. Hashem, can you help remove that from me so that way I can make decisions a lot easier? That's the way Rav Moshe understands that. And he points to, or not him, Reb Tzaddik of Lublin, the Tzidkas HaTzadik. He writes that this is what David HaMelech meant. When David HaMelech writes in Tehillim, Leiv Tahor Barali Elokim, that God create me, Leiv Tahor, with a pure heart. Leiv Tahor Barali, create this pure heart within me. V'ruach nachon chadesh bekirbi, and make anew for me a pleasant spirit. This is what David HaMelech asks Hashem to do. Says Reb Tzaddik of Lublin that David HaMelech is asking Hashem to pray that Hashem should change his nature, that Hashem should add this part of his nature to him that will help him influence to do the right thing. Basically, add on to my Yetzer Hatov Hashem and limit my Yetzer Hara. That's what David HaMelech was asking of Hashem. So it's not that we're asking Hashem that he should take over my free will. No, not at all. Ultimately, that's going to be mine. I have to be the one to make the decisions. But it doesn't mean that my nature, which is something that is God-given, is something that can't be changed. If a person, let's say, using a mental health example again, that if a person is receiving mental health treatment, that they have to put in the work for the treatment to be effective. It's all about the work. It's not about what happens in the room. The first thing you learn in psychology, it's about the work that happens outside of the room that's really critical. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't also daven to Hashem that all the work you're putting in shouldn't be successful. Whereas we should ask Hashem that if this is what I'm working on, Hashem, please help me in accomplishing this goal of becoming more patient, becoming more kind, becoming more thoughtful, whatever it might be, that we ask Hashem to make it easier so that the decisions will come. Rav Dessler, though, gives a little bit of a different perspective. And Rav Dessler's perspective is really, it has been monumental. Rav Dessler's essay on this topic of how free are all of our decisions truly is a question that we've answered now with the Rambam of that we ultimately do make all of our decisions and we have complete freedom. It doesn't mean that we aren't influenced, sometimes influenced heavily. And we pointed to a number of different sources that indicate that yes, we are truly 100% free, with influences that make our freedom a little bit more difficult to be able to exercise properly. Rav Dessler, though, takes it and flips the whole topic. He flips the answer completely. And really, Rav Dessler has become like the gold standard in this. Rav Elia Dessler Zatzal was the founder of the Gateshead Kollel in the Gateshead Yeshiva in England. He then became the mashgiach of the Panovich Yeshiva in the 40s in Eretz Yisrael. He passed away at the young age of 61 years old in 1953. Reb Dessler was one of the major Jewish thinkers of the previous generation, I guess you could say, although his influence is really still in this generation. Reb Dessler's Svarim, the Michtav Melio, they translated into Strive for Truth. I'd highly recommend everyone reading it. This particular essay that we're going to go through, I printed copies so everyone can keep it for themselves. This is something to keep and hold on to, review often. This is a gem of a piece. Rav Dessler addressing the issue of defining where our free will really lies. Where are we truly free? And Rav Dessler writes the following. Do I not have a copy? Oh, yeah, Aaron, you mind grabbing that copy over there? What? Reb Elia Dessler. Yeah. Thank you. So Reb Dessler writes the following, and this is what has been known as the Nekudas HaBechira, the point of free choice. Where does the point of free choice lie? Says Reb Dessler. In short, we'll say in short what Rav Dessler writes, and then we're going to go through excerpts of the piece. We're not going to read through the whole thing, but we'll go through excerpts of the piece. Rav Dessler basically writes that the goal of all of us is actually not to constantly be exercising free will. What does he mean? The goal is not to exercise free will. He says, yeah, the goal is not to exercise free will. Our goal is to ultimately have every single decision we make be the right one and not be challenged to make the wrong one. What is that? Not really free choice. That's just being a good person, hopefully. That you've worked on yourself so much to the point that you have reached a sense of perfection where there is not one hiccup in your decision-making process. You're never going to be challenged to do the wrong thing. That's the ultimate goal. So basically, Rav Dessler is saying the ultimate goal is that we don't have any free will at all. But we all know that there are some decisions we make that, if you think about it like that, yeah, I guess I'm not really free. For example, I don't think, Baruch Hashem, I have to say Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem, I don't think I'm free in my decision making whether or not I eat kosher. I don't. Now, when I go to Sky High and I pass Carl's Jr. every day, and I look at the beautiful pictures that they have hanging there, mamish, these beautiful pictures, the delicious looking pictures. Does it look appetizing? Of course it looks appetizing, but not even like zero thought ever of like, you know what? Today, I think I'm just going to do it. I think I'm just going to drive in. I'm finally going to get that number 6 I've always wanted. And it's going to happen. Of course not. Of course, like so Baruch Hashem, I don't have free will with regards to that anymore. No, it's not. No, because I'm never going to make that other choice. Never. I'm never going to make the other choice.
You can't do what you don't have done. I mean, we have knowledge.
So, okay. Now, currently in my state of being, it's just an impossibility. It's an impossibility. It is. It's an impossibility. I'll use an even more extreme example. In the current state of being that I am, I will never murder my mother. I won't. I love her. Mom, I don't know if you're going to listen to this, but you have confirmation. I will never murder you. Am I making that decision? No, I'm not making that decision. Because it's impossible for me to act otherwise. It's impossible. This is what Rav Dessler is suggesting. Now, at that point, you can't even call that free will anymore. And the opposite extreme also. That a person could be that they have been, take a crazy scenario, a person that was abandoned from the point that they were 1 day old. They kept moving from foster home to foster home to foster home. Every single foster home they went to got worse and worse and worse. The ability to trust is going to be much more difficult for them as they get older. That even in that scenario, the decision to not trust somebody is potentially not even necessarily at free will to the specifics of that scenario. Now, so that is Rav Dessler's basic point. We're going to read through his presentation, and because he'll obviously say it a lot better than me, but that's his basic presentation. That our goal is to limit our free choice by achieving a clarity and not making the sin even an option. That's the ultimate goal.
You also said that it's more meritorious to
So what Rav Dessler would respond, what Stuart said is that isn't it more virtuous to overcome something than to just act by habit? Certainly it is. Rav Dessler would say, when does that virtue take place? When do you get that merit? That first time. When the clarity sets in. Yeah, because at some point there is a hill to climb. So whenever that hill is climbed, you receive the merit, and you probably receive the merit beyond that. Every time you continue to do it because you're now living in that plane, right? So let's read through his essay. And this essay is like, before this whole series where we've been discussing now was the eighth ninth class related to free will, the topics of machshava, and things like this. Whenever questions related to free will have come up, or whenever I would present something about free will, it would always just be basically presenting Rav Dessler as a reference point, because this is like the gold standard in how to understand how our free will actually works, how it manifests itself. So he writes over here on page number 1, and you know what, I'm going to share my screen that way everyone on the Zoom could also appreciate this piece from Rav Dessler. Can everyone see this okay? Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, yes, thank you. It's clear.
Perfect. So Rav Dessler writes the following. He says, when two armies, so this is the Bechira point, right? The point of free choice. When two armies are locked in battle, fighting takes place only at the battlefront. Territory behind the lines of one army, behind the lines of one army is under that army's control, and little or no resistance need be expected there, right? When you're on your side, you're not going to expect there to be fighting that takes place between the other side once you're already in, your safe house. A similar situation prevails in respect of territory behind the lines of the other army. If one side gains a victory at the front and pushes the enemy back, line number 5, the position of the battlefront will have changed. In fact, therefore, fighting takes place only at one location. It's amazing. Only at one location. Though potentially the line could be drawn anywhere in the territories of the two contending countries. He says, on a moral level, it's the same idea. Line number 9. The situation is very similar with regard to Bechira. That's free will. Everyone has free choice at the point where truth meets falsehood. In other words, Bechira takes place at that point where the truth as the person sees it confronts the illusion produced in him by the power of falsehood. Meaning, call it Yetzer Hara, call it your passions, your desires, your nature, your nurture, your environment, whatever it is that is giving you this illusion of falsehood, of influence, and you know that the truth is against that, that's where the free choice lies, of you needing to make that choice lies. But the majority of a person's actions are undertaken without any clash between truth and falsehood taking place. Many of a person's actions may happen to coincide with what is objectively right because he's been brought up that way, and it does not occur to him to do otherwise. And many bad and false decisions may be taken simply because the person does not realize they are bad. For both good and bad, this is the way things are most of the time. Most of the time. In such cases, and this is the chiddush of Rav Dessler. This is really, this genius of his. In such cases, no valid bechira or choice has been made. Free will is exercised and a valid bechira made only on the borderline between the forces of good and the forces of evil within that person. It's only at the battlefront that the decision to make. Where the tension lies is where free will manifests itself. But on the other line, on the other sides, that if it's something that I'm not sensitive to as being bad, so then how am I going to know even to combat that? It's something that I'm not even sensitive to is at being wrong. So I just keep doing it. And the same is true with regards to once I know something to be 100% true with complete clarity, that it's not even a challenge for me anymore. My passions and desires will never influence me, at least I think. will never influence me to go buy that number 6 from Carl's Jr. So then that's just, there's no free will at that point anymore. The free choice lies in the tension between truth and false. He continues, take a look on the next page.
So what do you make with the real choice?
Assuming you've made that choice so many times that you have the clarity of truth that the falsehood is no longer challenging you to make the wrong decision. Right. It doesn't just fall away the first time you score, right? Right. I would say, like, you may have won the battle, but you didn't win the war. Once you won the war, so then it's done. Exactly.
Actually, in agreement with Aristotle, who says that you get that way when you make doing good things that happen.
When you make doing good things that happen. Right. So Stewart pointed out that Aristotle writes that
you get this way, but when you make doing the right thing that happen.
that you get this way when you meet doing good things that happen.
Yeah.
Right. When you make doing good things that happen. Right. Exactly. Now, it is interesting to note that Rav Dessler's grandfather, who was Rabbi Salanter, at least that's what's written on his kever, on his tombstone. Neched, it could be he was a great grandson, but Neched of Rabbi Yisrael Misalant. That's what it's written on his kever. That's the only description that's on his kever. I think it just says Ponitman Hamashkiach, the counselor, Rabbi Eliezer Dessler, Neched of Rabbi Salanter. Very interesting. But Rabbi Salanter writes, though, that even once you reach this level of habit, which Rav Dessler is also going to acknowledge, of habit to do the right thing, that doesn't mean that there isn't more room to grow. So he's gonna discuss this in a minute. So he writes over here. He continues. We're on page number 3, line 12. It must be realized that this Bechira point does not remain static in any given individual. With each good Bechira successfully carried out, this is like what you were saying, Marty, the person rises higher in spiritual level. That is, things that were previously in line of battle are now in the area controlled by the Yetzer Hatov, the good inclination to do the right thing. And actions done in that area can be undertaken without struggle and without Bechira, right? Without any choice, really. You're going to do the right thing. In fact, he writes that this is what the Gemara means, that mitzvah goreres mitzvah, that one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah. That's what he means, that it's become habitual to do mitzvah. That in this sense, we can understand the saying that one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah. And so in the other direction, giving into the Yetzer Hara pushes back the frontier of the good, right? Again, using this analogy of a battle. And an act which previously cost one a struggle with one's conscience will now be done without Bechira at all. Right? Before, you were doing the right thing, but you gave into your Yetzer Hara. And then you gave it into again and again and again and again, to the point that you've lost potentially not only the battle, potentially you've lost the war. And now the line has shifted downwards, that you've lost ground, you've lost territory. The Yetzer Hatov no longer functions effectively in that area. And so we have learned one sin leads to another sin. This is an amazing chap in the Gemara, amazing explanation of the Gemara. The Gemara says that Aveira goreres Aveira, that one sin leads to another sin. That's what he means. And then he takes to the point that where the Gemara takes it a step further and says, as soon as one has committed a sin twice, it is no longer a sin for him. Averos naaseh kemitzvos, that their transgressions, their sins, will be viewed in the sinner's eye. Eventually, you do it so often as a mitzvah, because you're gonna be desensitized to it being wrong, right? So that's where, right? So it can move. It's fluid. It can move, right? I hope that for me, it never moves with regards to treif. At this point, I don't have any bechir about it. But if God forbid, for whatever happens, that things change, I hope that's not the case. but it could be that I will end up having to make a free choice about it.
The thing about this is, it gives you the opportunity to always have a Befriend point.
Oh, that's what he's going to get to now. That's what he's going to get to now. So continuing at the bottom of page 3, as we've said, education plays a large part in determining one's Bechira point, determining that point of making that free choice. A person may have been brought up to do many good actions as a matter of course on the next page, page 4. All this means that his Bechira point is at a high level. For example, one may have been brought up in an environment of Torah among people who devote themselves to good deeds. In this case, his Bechira point, his point of free will, will not be whether or not to commit an actual sin, but whether to do a mitzvah with more or less devotion and kavanah. You see? So even when a person has become, has been brought up properly, their environment is the right environment, and they have a lot of territory. It doesn't mean that the Yetzer Hara goes away completely. They also have that Bechira point. They also have a point of tension that they need to contend to. It's not about whether or not I'm going to pray, but it's about how much intent I'm going to have in my prayer. It's not about whether or not I'm going to learn Torah, but it's about how seriously I'm going to take the Torah learning. It's not about whether or not I'm going to eat kosher. It's about whether or not I'm going to make my brachos properly when I do eat the kosher, right? Another may be brought up, however, on the other extreme. Another may be brought up among evildoers of the lowest grade, among thieves and robbers. For him, whether or not to steal does not present any Bechira at all. His Bechira point might be on the question of shooting his way out when discovered. For him, this may be the crucial Bechira, the point of tension, right? For him, it's not about whether or not he's going to be in the gang. It's about what kind of role he's going to have in it, what he's going to do, right? It could be that he's not going to have a choice as to whether or not to steal. It's the only way of life he knows. But whether or not he's going to commit murder may potentially be the next level. This is where, for him, the forces of good and evil, truth and untruth, are evenly balanced. Which, by the way, I will point out where I don't recall whether or not Rav Dessler says this directly, but we believe in reward and punishment, right? Remember, reward and punishment was one of the proofs from Rav Sadia Gaon about free will, which means that using the basic transitive property, what would mean then is that a person's reward and punishment is also fluid depending on where their point of choice lies, right? Meaning to say that if this person who's born in this scenario, in this situation, gets his way out of the gang, gets his way into living an honorable life, are they perfect? Do they sin? Sure they do. And they may be living a much, much less sanctified life than someone who is sitting and going to davening 3 times a day, sitting and learning Torah, doing mitzvah, making brachos, always eating kosher, keeping Shabbos. For all you know, the person who is living in a respectable, moderate level religious lifestyle, after gaining so much territory over his Yetzer Hara, of beating that battle with his point of Bechira so much that he was able to get there, may end up having a loftier place in the world to come. Not maybe, will have a loftier place in the world to come than the one who has been religious his entire life, always doing the right thing. Because again, the point here is where the tension lies, and that's what God is focusing on. For him, this may be the crucial Bechira. This is where, for him, the forces of good and evil, truth and untruth, are evenly balanced. It may well be that murder is something that he knows in his heart of hearts to be wrong. This is the truth as revealed to him by his Yetzer Tov. And it is his truth that he is tempted to deny or distort. Continuing in line 18. So we see that education environment cannot in any way change the essential act of Bechira. That's an important line. It doesn't mean that you're not making decisions. Of course you're making decisions, but only the location at which it takes place, the position of the Bechira point on the moral scale. That's the ultimate point. It's not to say that if a person is brought up the right way, you've just ruined their chances of being virtuous or receiving any merit from in the world to come. Of course not, because they also have Bechira points that they need to overcome. And if they do, they're going to receive lofty reward, right? Every human being possesses the power of perceiving the truth available to him at his particular level, clinging to it and refusing to be deflected from it by the seductive illusions of falsehood. In this, there's no difference at all whether his upbringing raised or lowered his Bechira point. The ability to adopt the truth as he knows it is equal in all situations. So, according to Rav Dessler, answering the question of, are all of our decisions free? No. According to Rav Dessler, no. Actually, Rav Dessler would say most of our decisions are not free. Doesn't mean we don't have free will. Of course we have free will. We used our free will to get ourselves to that place of how many of our decisions are free. And we are exercising our free will at the point of tension between truth and false, emes and sheker, good and evil. That's an amazing, so very different than the first one. We basically presented two approaches to this evening, to the question of, are all of our decisions truly free? Number one, from the Rambam, we said, yes. Miri explained further that it doesn't mean that we don't have our nature and our nurture that maybe influence us, but every single decision is 100% a free choice that we are making. Dessler says, no, it's not the case, and it's not the goal. The goal is not. The goal is to have so much clarity that you have achieved perfection and that sin is not going to be an option anymore. And always pushing that nekudas habechira, pushing that point of tension higher and higher and higher, gaining more and more and more ground, more and more territory for your Yetzer Tov to act appropriately. To sum up, he concludes, everyone has free. He actually does not conclude here, but we're going to conclude at this point in the essay. I highly encourage everybody to continue reading this. If for those on the Zoom would like to receive a copy, just send me an email. The shul also has a number of copies of books from Rabbi Dessler with this essay printed in it. To sum it up, he writes, everyone has free choice at his Bechira point, but the position of the Bechira point itself is determined by various factors. This may be affected by his own previous choices, page 5, which may have raised or lowered his Bechira point, or it may have affected by factors outside his control, meaning things like just being born that way. Divine providence may have placed him from childhood in a certain environment, higher or lower, as the case may be. Next paragraph, there is thus no free choice except at the point of free choice. And this point is fixed by antecedent factors, but there is no outside factors that can affect the act of Bechira itself. Making that choice is going to always be up to me. Here, the human being himself reigns supreme. So, we have these two approaches. Ultimately, practically speaking, there's not really much of a difference in the two choices in terms of how we act, but they conceptually are drastically different. Rav Dessler is saying where our focus needs to be is where that tension lies. That
supposed to be pushing higher to higher level. It would mean that you should never be satisfied with not having.
Correct. A person should never be satisfied. That was why we learned from, remember, if you recall, when we gave the introduction to this whole class about life's biggest questions, we quoted from the Chazon Ish. That was the Chazon Ish's whole point, that a person can never be satisfied in life. A person always needs to be challenging themselves, questioning themselves, pushing themselves further and further and further to gain more of this perspective of truth. Okay, we're going to have to stop here for this evening. I need to go pick someone up from the airport, so I apologize that we're not stopping early. Oh yeah. Okay, someone's waiting for me at the airport. I have to go, but it's a pleasure to learn with everybody. Next week we will continue. We may actually be moving on from free will next week. Probably something related, but another very interesting question that we're going to be analyzing. All right. We'll stop here for now. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.